Coming up on Good Journeys with Second Mountain.
We are at the moment in time when we are seeing that you can't solve an ecological crisis from within a story that says that success is accumulating material possessions, no matter whether the Body Shop launched on the stock exchange in '84 or not. We're seeing that you can't solve global inequality or even local inequality from within a story that says that the world is a contest and we have to climb above one another.
Welcome to Good Journeys with Second Mountain, the show that explores the trails travelled and lessons learned from some truly extraordinary guests. Hello and welcome to the first Good Journeys with Second Mountain episode of 2024. I'm your host and the founder of Second Mountain Comms, Ben Veal. I set up my business back in 2020 to help good people do good, and I love nothing more than speaking with others who share that same goal. I'm so grateful that you can join me and my very special guest today for this purpose-driven conversation. We both share a heart for social change and a passion to move towards a brave new world. Before we dive into that and I get on to introducing my guest, a very quick plug if this is your first time tuning into the show. Firstly, welcome, nice to have you here. There are now 2 seasons worth of inspiring purpose-driven conversations in our archives and a tremendous lineup of guests who we have planned for this season in 2024. So please subscribe, follow, share and help us to grow. We've got some amazing guests coming up this year. But now, on to my very special guest for today. He is the co-founder of the new Citizen Project, is the author of Citizens, Why the Key to Fixing Everything is All of Us, and he joins me today to explore whether 2024 will be the year that the citizen movement truly takes over. My guest today is the brilliant Jon Alexander. Welcome to the show, Jon. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Lovely to be here. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. We met about a year ago, didn't we? Now, about a year ago, I think it was the Bath Lit Fest, and that was after I'd read your book Citizens. I was absolutely blown away. Here is an indication of how blown away, because I don't usually do this to my books. Absolutely covered in post-it notes.
Love it.
So much of it resonated with me. But at that event, you shared the stage with Derek Bardowell, who wrote the book Giving Back: How to Do Good Better. And that book was published at around about the same time as yours. But weirdly, before that event, you'd never met one another. Were you kind of taken aback by the similarities of the pair of you?
Yeah, it was a bit of an odd one. It was quite fun listening to your chat with Derek on this pod after. Highly recommend that episode to people as well. It's kind of crazy that we'd never come across each other before. There's some of the same individuals even we tell the stories of in our books, and I think that kind of shared spirit of like another world is possible, right? And is so close actually. Is like right at the heart of my work, right at the heart of his. Like, and I think there's a growing number of people kind of waking up to that, and there needs to be right now. I think.
Yeah, and I reached out to you because 2024 is very much this milestone historic year. It feels it's a fascinating one because, as you've said in your book, it marks 40 years since these big consumer super brands first arrived. So you mentioned, Apple launching the Mac, Nike selling its first Air Jordans, Virgin Atlantic breaking open the skies, and also the year I was born. If as
that momentous occasion for all of humanity, right? That's very good.
My mum likes to think.
I mean, that moment, that year, I think 1984. I mean, not just, but like when you, as a storyteller, when you discover that the year 1984 has like huge resonance in the way in the story you're trying to tell, you're like, yes. Obviously because of the Orwellian overtones and so forth, but like it really is a very powerful year to encapsulate what I am trying to describe and what I'm trying to help people see as the consumer story, this idea of who we are. and why it's been so powerful, why it's been so attractive, why it's stuck so hard.
Yeah.
Because in that year 1984, it's not just that the big brands arrived, right? Like, it's also that, like, Body Shop floated on the stock exchange, so you had the idea that you can buy stuff to save the planet, that ethical consumption can kind of solve the world for us, like, landed in the world really powerfully that year. You also had Band-Aid, the first Band-Aid, and the idea that you can buy stuff to solve global poverty. Not only that, you had the LA Olympics, like the only Olympics, or sorry, I should say the first Olympics to be funded by commercial sponsorship. And what happened with LA is so fascinating, because when they were seeking the host for the 1984 Games, this was off the back of Montreal, which had gone into massive debt, and until that point, commercial sponsorship wasn't really a major part of the funding model of the Games. And LA said, we will only host the Games if we are allowed to do this. And they were the only applicant to host those Games. They had the IOC over a barrel.
Right.
And so in this year, you have this kind of golden dream with all these different events, this golden dream that we can buy stuff to solve all of our problems. Actually, that is the route to the kind of to the good society. And I think I always like to emphasize that, and I think it's a really powerful one to go back to, because what I'm saying when I talk about consumerism in the way I do is not some sort of it's not a kind of lazy black and white kind of evil thing. It's not saying like this was ultimately, it is a deeply problematic frame, but what I'm trying to do, I think, is help people understand that this is a story that has some appeal, that has a logic to it, and it has a kind of morality to it. It has an idea. It's not just a sort of unalloyed, explicitly kind of bad, like, people are material. It's saying, like, if we all pursue individual self-interest, then that will add up to collective interest, and that will be the good society. And that has kept us. The only reason it's kept us so trapped is because it has that internal moral logic, and to see that the year 1984 is really powerful to help show that story.
Yeah.
But we are now, as you come of age, my friend, the consumer story, I think, is out of date, and that's a big part of where we're at in 2024.
So you said, before coming on this show, that, your New Year's resolution, Jon, is to use your voice. So what do you mean by that? What does that look like?
Well, so I think the year 2024 is incredibly vital. Like, we have to. I'm having a bit of a change of tone at the beginning of this year. I think I've been reflecting over Christmas and looking around the world, and I think we have to acknowledge that we are in it now. Like, we are in a moment in time where we are going to have to find a new way forward, or we're going to descend into some pretty dark spaces, and that darkness is already here, right? Like, and I think we actually have to start talking about this and acknowledging it. The world is now a dark and dangerous place, and it could get significantly worse. And 2024 represents a year when, as humanity, actually, on a major scale, there are elections in 50 countries, and there are the European elections. 2 billion people go to the polls this year. This is basically a year of massive collective choice about how we face this darkness. Like, are we gonna let it consume us, or are we at least going to create the space for us to build something different, for us to lean into a different idea of who we are? And what the dynamic I think that's going on in that is one where, as the consumer story collapses, and it is collapsing, like we are at the moment in time when we are seeing that you can't solve an ecological crisis from within a story that says that success is accumulating material possessions, no matter whether the Body Shop launched on the stock exchange in 84 or not. We're seeing that you can't solve global inequality or even local inequality from within a story that says that the world is a contest, and we have to climb above one another, no matter whether Band-Aid launched into the world in 1984 or not. And we're seeing that you can't solve crises of loneliness and mental ill health that arguably underpin a deep crisis of masculinity, which I know is something you're very passionate about, and maybe we could talk a bit more about. from within a story that says that we're all isolated individuals and we need to sort of and the pursuit of self-interest is the goal, because that story will breed the Andrew Tates of this world.
Yeah. Well, no,
and so you have to find a different way. Sorry.
No, I mean, you touched on the kind of loneliness standpoint. I mean, I think that was one of the real learnings and takeaways from COVID. And, trust me, we're going to get onto the pandemic in a minute, but I think that was a real takeaway, that we suddenly, we were socially isolated before. We had become disconnected from one another, feeling like we were connected through technology when we weren't. That COVID lockdown, the first one, really, really underpinned actually how vital that connection is and how lonely we are. I think for me, I created some of my strongest ever male friendships that have since borne real fruit 4 years on, because I actually dedicated time to going out for walks with other men, doing WhatsApp groups, doing FaceTimes, because before I'd never really allowed that to happen in my life. But it's a huge problem. Loneliness and this social isolation. And you're right, buying stuff doesn't fix anything.
Yeah, and I do think it runs really deep. The reason why I sort of declared that resolution to use my voice is I think I am now, like, for better or for worse, the book has been out for 18 months or so. This idea of seeing the world through the lens of story, this idea that we are in a moment in time when the consumer story is collapsing, when in the uncertainty that creates, an older, sort of much darker story actually is rising, than what I call the subject story, the idea that sort of we should all keep our heads down and do as we're told, because the God-given few will lead us to the best outcomes. The kind of the authoritarian story is rising, because it always rises in times of uncertainty and chaos, because it simplifies and offers a solution. In that moment, if we are to kind of break the dangerous kind of binary of subject and consumer, we're going to have to find one another. We're going to have to connect with one another. We're going to have to imagine a different future, and we're going to need our leaders to do the same thing as well. And I guess, like I say, the reason why I made that resolution, use my voice, is I think I have begun, at least to some degree, to be heard in some of those places, and as a white 6 foot athletic like guy with every one of the privileges in the book, like I can pass in those corridors. And so I think I felt uncomfortable with that, and I still feel uncomfortable with that to a great degree. But I think this year is of such critical importance that my sort of commitment is to step into the place that I have been offered. I fully intend to use that space to open the door to others, to pass the mic, to kind of to shift the conversation. But what I will not do this year, and my kind of promise to myself and to the world, is I won't hide my flame. I'm not gonna, like, we've got to roll the dice. I'm mixing metaphors horrendously.
You really are. It's lovely.
But we've got to stand up, like because and just to dwell in this kind of the political context a little bit more, like, one of the examples I've been staring at is what happened in Argentina at the end of last year. In Argentina, there was a presidential runoff between a guy called Javier Milei, who's now the president of Argentina with 56% of the vote, and his opponent was Sergio Massa, who was the finance minister in the government up until that point. Now, that choice that the Argentinians were facing was essentially a choice between Milei, who is his nickname is El Loco, the madman. He took a chainsaw to rallies. He's like Trump on gas, right? Wow. That was one choice. The other choice was the finance minister in a government that is presiding over a financial catastrophe. And they were choosing between the status quo. Right, the consumer story, like, carry on, we can fix the system from where we are, and an outright subject story, like, put your trust in me, I will fix it, I'll break everything down. And frankly, when you give people that kind of choice, and we're not so far from that in so many places around the world, like that is the template for Trump versus Biden. That could easily be where we are at in the UK in 5 years' time. Like, you cannot. It is entirely understandable when people choose the subject story in that context, and so we are right there. And so a friend of mine put it to me as I was discussing these ideas with him the other day. Like, they only have to win once. Like, Millet now has a huge amount of power, and he's tearing things apart. And so we don't, like, I don't want to. I struggle with this, and in a way, I'm excited to talk with you about this and kind of use this conversation to get a sense of where to place this, because but it is critical to see the extent of the danger in this time. Like, I do, to the way you frame this conversation, I do genuinely believe that 2024 could be a year that the citizen story really kind of comes into its own, starts to really powerfully manifest on the global stage. But I don't see that as the default path. I think the default path is much darker and more dangerous than that. But I see in that a call to stand up, a call to connect, a call to build, rather than a call to give up, right? And that's what I mean by use my voice.
Thank you so much for being with us for this inspiring conversation today on the Good Journeys with Second Mountain podcast. We'll return to our guest interview very soon, but I want to just take a few seconds now to thank our partners on the show, Resilient Leaders Elements, and tell you all about the positive change they're making in the world. We live in uncertain times where the only constant is change. Resilience has never mattered more, and it's much more than just a buzzword to the team at RLE. Leadership is about resilience, and RLE are focused on making world-class leadership development available to all, training people worldwide to build the skill sets needed to become resilient leaders. RLE's highly respected Resilient Leaders Development Programme is a bespoke development tool that's perfect for leaders of all levels, and you can sign up right now. So if you want to turbocharge your leadership growth and become more resilient both in the workplace and in your personal life, there's never been a better time to start your journey. Visit resilientleaderselements.com now to find out more. I think what would be really helpful for those that haven't read the book is to just explain a little bit more what you mean by the citizen story. So how does that shift, Jon, from the subject story or the consumer story?
So thank you. Yeah. So the book and my work in the world is rooted in these three stories of the individual in society, each of which I consider to be kind of moral logics, like ideas for who we are and how we can operate and how we should operate. As you say, the subject story, which was, I would argue, was dominant across the world, or actually increasingly until the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, says something like the right thing to do is to keep your head down, do as you're told, get what you're given, because the God-given few will lead us to the best outcomes. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of colonial story, the authoritarian story, the paternalistic story. And that story kind of collapsed in on itself at the beginning of the 20th century. And out of the two world wars, we more or less deliberately, more or less consciously constructed the consumer story. And the consumer story says, look out for number one, pursue the best deal for yourself, choose the option that suits you best from those that are offered, on the basis that individual self-interest will add up to collective interest. That's the morality of the consumer story. The citizen story, actually, I believe, is much deeper, even than the subject, goes back much further in who we are, is a much truer, more authentic story of humanity. And the citizen story actually says, get involved, like contribute your ideas, energy, and resources to the pursuit of the best outcomes for society as a whole. And critically, that it challenges people in positions of power and influence, people as leaders, to see their role as being to tap into that set of ideas, energy, and resources. And the logic there is not like the God-given few will lead us. It's not the individual self-interest will add up to collective interest. The logic is all of us are smarter than any of us. The logic is we all have unique contributions and experiences and views to contribute. And it is precisely when we aggregate those, when they bring those together in a kind of in dynamic ways, that we get to the best outcomes.
Yeah. Something that
and there's a lovely story. Sorry, go on.
No. You're the guest.
I was just going to say my favourite story in the research for the book, and I think the kind of the template for in a lot of ways for how I'm thinking about this, the political moment that we're in, is what's happened in Taiwan over the last decade or so. And I won't go into it in loads of detail, but to come back to your pandemic prompt, and maybe you'll lead us somewhere else from there. But the Taiwanese COVID response is truly like an incredible encapsulation of this approach. Like,
yeah, so I'll just stop you there quickly. So you share this in the book, and this was so eye-opening for me, but I also found it so hugely depressing against the context of, you know, the lived experience we had, you know, not just in the UK, but around so much of the Western world, and all of the lives that were unnecessarily lost as a result of inaction by those in power. So what, the Taiwan response really surprised me. Can you talk me through it a bit?
Sure. And so what happened basically was they crowdsourced the national response. The president gave a speech right at the beginning where she said, we effectively said, we don't know how to get through this. We do know that it's going to be an enormous challenge, and we also know that the way we will get through it best is if we tap into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone. We're going to need everyone on the pitch. And the three principles, the three design principles of the Taiwanese COVID response, which are publicly, you can find this anyway. They talked about fast, fun, and fair.
Okay.
And they did all sorts of like high tech stuff, very kind of tech driven society. So they set challenge prizes for people to create apps that would track face mask availability in case outbreaks and all this kind of stuff. But they also did some really low tech stuff. They've set up a phone line where any citizen could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better. Sure. My favorite story within the story is that a 6-year-old boy rang up and said, the boys in my class don't want to wear their face masks because they're pink and they think that they're girly. So you should do something to make pink face masks cool, and I think you should work with the baseball team. And 3 days later, they had the little boy, the president, and half the Taiwanese baseball team on the national televised press conference, resplendent in their pink face masks. And it sounds like you say. It sounds. It can feel depressing to hear that. It can also feel kind of unbelievable. And it's only when you sort of switch off your consumer story logic, your embedded consumer story logic, and kind of go, well, actually, who knows best how little boys' brains work? Another little boy, right? Like, yeah. And this is you start to when you think that story through. And when I heard it for the first time, it kind of blew my mind as well. I was talking to the Taiwanese digital minister. And yet, actually, it's just basic common sense. Like, we all know this. We know that when you tap it, when you gather ideas from different places, if you can create the right processes to make that system work, and process design is a huge part of this, you can do remarkable things. Now, maybe to return to your thing, like the idea of this as something quite depressing to hear, in contrast with how we dealt with COVID here and across much of the world. Actually, I think seeing that through the lens of the other two stories again is quite a powerful thing to do. You can see that when COVID first arrived, there was sort of delay and dalliance and uncertainty as to what to do, because our governments by default, I would argue, see us as consumers. They don't. There's not a sort of natural expectation that we're going to want to be involved in these challenges, and therefore they want to sort of pretend it's not going to happen, basically. And then when it does hit super hard because of that delay, you end up having to go to the subject story. You go to, like, do as you're told, stay home, we'll protect you. And then I think in the UK, the really interesting thing, actually, and in a lot of ways, like, I do agree with you that it's kind of depressing, but I also see a huge amount of hope in that moment, because what happened in this country was, even though the sort of the message from government was coming from this subject story place, actually what we were doing was very much citizen story, right? Like, you remember the street WhatsApp groups, the mutual aid groups, remember the NHS first responder scheme, and that, like, we were leaning in. The great danger, though, and the hard lesson that, as I say, I think we need to stare at in 2024 and treat as our challenge to find another way through, is that our governments at the moment, even the best of them, and I don't think this would have been so different. I mean, I don't think the world would have been parties in Downing Street, but like, I don't think this would have been so different, you know, under a Labour government, under Starmer or whatever. Like, the political culture, the idea of who we are that dominates in government is, I think, the consumer story. Like, when the subject story fell apart, when the death rate was rising to the extent that they couldn't sustain the idea that government would protect us, we went back to the consumer story. Remember, eat out to help out. Like, there can be no more literal, no more direct kind of co-option of that urge to support one another that had resulted in mutual aid and street WhatsApp groups into the service of consumption than eat out to help out. And so the challenge we face, I think, in this moment in time, in this year, across the world, and maybe in the UK, actually, we're kind of lucky because we're at a phase of the cycle where we might have a bit more time, but we're still on the countdown. We're still on the clock. Like, we have to figure out how to reinvent and redesign our processes and systems around an idea of ourselves that gets everyone involved, that gives us all a place, because otherwise we are going to end up in the subject story. Like, it is only a matter of time before that cycle of mistrust, distrust leads us to a place where we face the same kind of choice as the Argentinians.
Yeah. You've said in your book, so what was really interesting is, obviously, you come from, and for those that haven't read it, you come from an Adland background, so you've seen the other side of the coin here. And you know, you talk. There's a line that really jumped out to me. You talked about, you know, what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we are consumers 3,000 times a day? You know, we are exposed to so many marketing and advertising messages day in and day out. You know, is there any way not to feel trapped in this consumer story? How do we avoid that? Because I don't have the answer to that.
I mean, thank you for drawing attention to that. I think the thing I would take from this is that we are citizens by nature, is the starting point for me.
Yeah.
Humans are. I have sort of two fundamental beliefs about humanity. The first is that we are by nature citizens. As I say, we're collaborative, creative, caring creatures. We can and want to get involved in shaping the world for the better. The second, though, is that we are fundamentally storytelling and story dwelling creatures. Like, we need stories. We need ideas of who we are, ideas of what's best, in order to understand who to collaborate with, what to create, who to care for. And I think the reason why that insight that we are telling ourselves, we are surrounded by this story that we're consumers on a constant basis, is to say, like, this, we are not starting from a blank canvas, but nor are we standing in human truth at the moment. And I think that what that helps me do is to say, like, actually, the work isn't to teach ourselves to be citizens. We don't need to sort of treat this as an intergenerational project where we have to sort of re-educate
because we know it in our hearts, don't we? By how quickly, as you said, how quickly we turned into citizens.
Exactly.
In response to COVID, we know in our heart what it means to have community, to be connected, and to help one another.
Exactly, and that therefore becomes the work, right? Like, the act of connection, the act of finding the people to go for a walk with, the act of committing to a place or a community and seeing yourself as part of that. Like, it might have a little kind of 4 steps to be a good citizen that I talk about quite a lot. There's like, the first is see the stories, like choose to see these things, because when you see that you are not like, the first step, like you're not you are being told something all the time. And seeing that is the first step to freeing yourself from it, making yourself conscious of that rather than just assuming that that's how it is. The second step, I think, is to choose a place, a community, your workplace, your community of interest, wrestling for you perhaps, and decide that that's going to be your domain of citizening. That's where you're going to do stuff. The third step is find the others. Right? Because all over the world, and in every aspect of society and every community, there are people who will be feeling the same. There will be people who are feeling just as trapped. And by putting up the kind of bat signal, as it were, you give those people permission to express the same thing. And then the final step is decide what to do together. Like, decide the first thing. The first thing can be really humble as long as it's collective, right? Like the number of stories that I came across in the research for the book that started with something as like small as a litter pig are phenomenal, right? Because that first act of collective agency, that first act of seeing that you are able to do so much more with others than you are able to do on your own, is something that then becomes like, a friend of mine, one of the references I love, is talked about citizenship as a muscle you build, not a cup you empty.
I love that.
Right. Yeah. And the moment you start to exercise that muscle, you start to like want to use it more because it feels good. And then it grows and grows, and you build and build. And then before you know it, you're doing transformative things. Like one of my favorite examples in the research for the book that I've stayed super close to, not least because when we first met, I felt like he was the guy I met was so different to me, is what's going on in Grimsby, an organisation called East Marsh United that started exactly in this way with a litter pick in about 4 or 5 years ago now. A guy called Billy went along to a councillors meeting because a neighbour of his basically guilt tripped him into going. And he got really hacked off at this meeting because the frame of that meeting was all like, tell me what the problems are so I can fix them for you. And he stood up at the meeting and was like, we're not going to have the problems fixed for us. Like, these promises have been being made for years and years by different people. But we don't need you to come save us. We can start to do this for ourselves. And he said, like, tomorrow night I'm going to go out and I'm going to clean up a street and come and join me. 14 people went and joined him the next night. 2 weeks later, there were 30 odd, on and on. And where you get to now is that a few years on, they've got a 6-monthly arts festival called the Sun and Moon. They've got a fortnightly magazine called The Proud East Martian. Last year they raised £500,000 in a community share offer, which in Grimsby is basically enough to buy a whole street and refit the houses using good local jobs and then let them out as a social landlord.
Incredible.
Like, and the work is continuing. The sort of, when you start to do that kind of thing, then the connections and the serendipities emerge. So around the same time, an old son of the town has come back and bought who made good, come back and bought the controlling stake in Grimsby Town Football Club, and now they've connected. And Grimsby Town Football Club is acting as a kind of anchor institution in the town. And like, people talk about levelling up and left behind and all that kind of stuff. Grimsby, like, go there, because that is a town that is hauling itself up. It's levelling itself up. Or I'd sort of almost prefer to say it's finding its own way. It's not trying to be another London or another whatever. It's being the fullest version of Grimsby, kind of in spite of all that's going on around it. And that is also, back to this kind of political context, that is the most powerful source of immunity against the subject story that you can possibly imagine. So Tommy Robinson tried to go to Grimsby, tried to hold an event in this pub on the East Marsh last year, and the community turned him away. And the day that he had been supposed to be speaking, they instead held an event called the 6 Feet of Your Street, and they all came out and like had a street party essentially, with people
Wonderful.
from all different backgrounds. Now that moment, I think, is an encapsulation of what we are most truly and what we're capable of. But unless we can find ways, like, we have to find ways to shift that understanding in the places where the stories come from. Because what happened, like I say, what happened in COVID, we were doing it everywhere. We were doing it. We were being citizens. And the power of government, not the power of government in a kind of obvious hard power way, but the power of government in a soft, actually a kind of narrative way, to shush that instinct, to say, shush little people, just go shopping, like go back to your place, is very dangerous.
It's fascinating how quickly we were willing as a society to become little people again, because there was that period where we, as you say, all became citizens, really rallied together. There was a real sense of we're all in this together. And then the fear factor weighed in, and the response of COVID in 2020 to the early 2021 version of basically keep away from one another. Anyone could pass this on to you. To then probably 2022 and moving into a cost of living of, right, that's over now, forget that ever happened, and now you've got to work 10 times harder to catch up with the economy. It's really interesting, I think, the different kind of challenges that we faced as a society in the last 3 years, and the different roles that we've been expected to play, and how we're still supposed to be subservient to, and I'm not just talking about the government that is in currently, but I'm talking about any of those leaders who really needed to lead us through a challenging time, and I would say let us down.
Yeah, I think that's right. I guess the inspiring and exciting thing to think about, I think, is what might it look like? How might we recognize this? But also, how might we create it ourselves? One of the other examples that I'm looking into more and more now is what's happened in Ireland, actually, over the last decade or so. And this is less related to COVID and more related to sort of ongoing systems and structures of government, and particularly to the role that citizens' assemblies and randomly selected groups of citizens can play in the decision making in a country. So the famous case in Ireland is that in 2018 there was a referendum on abortion, where 66% of the country voted to legalise access to abortion up to 12 weeks. And what many people don't know is that the recommendation to legal of a 12-week term was formed by a citizens' assembly, by 99 randomly selected Irish citizens, brought together for 5 weekends over 5 months to deliberate and call witnesses and understand the aspects, and then to put forward a recommendation to government that would then be put to the wider nation. Now, and like, I've been digging beneath the surface of this and going back further and going, how did that come about? How did we get to a place? How did Ireland get to a place where actually one of the biggest questions, and now, by the way, they're ongoing, like they've looked at end of life, and they're looking at drug policy and biodiversity and all of these different things.
Huge issues. Yeah.
Massive questions that so many societies, including our own in the UK, I would argue, or at least the Westminster centrally focused UK, are ignoring and ducking and actually kind of being distracted from by these sort of ridiculous kind of culture war questions. Ireland is facing those questions, and and when you dig beneath the surface, the way that initially came about was actually outside of government. It was a group called We the Citizens, who started by two academics at Dublin University, but actually as part of a wider kind of civil society movement, who developed, and this was in the context of the Irish financial crisis, sort of 2009-ish, and they were like, we believe that the people of Ireland need to be able to have some sort of role in the conversation about how our country faces this economic crisis, and we need a way to rebuild trust in government at the same time. Like, they were sort of it hit Ireland early,
Mm.
basically. And in response to that, they created this pilot citizens assembly, and they did a load of regional work leading up to it to set the agenda for it. And they did some really, like, in a single weekend with 100 odd people, they did some really in-depth kind of work on attitudes to whether spending cuts or tax rises were more desirable and in what proportion. And the work that they did shifted the whole frame of that debate in Ireland.
Amazing.
And they did that outside of government.
Mm.
And then government was so stretched and needed help from somewhere. And these guys had sort of anticipated this need, and government stepped into it
Right. Okay.
and said, actually, that we're going to use some of these recommendations, and we're going to make this thing famous, and now we're going to start to explore how we can do more of this. And that led to a constitutional convention that included randomly selected citizens, and that in turn led to the Citizens Assembly on abortion, and
Right.
from there. And that's so fascinating to me, because the same is true actually of Taiwan. Like the approach that became the Taiwanese COVID response started outside of government with
Mm.
originally a group of hackers who called themselves GovZero and created parallel websites to government websites, all with the URLs g0v.tw, and sort of imagined a different relationship between citizen and state. And I think in those two examples, there's something incredibly exciting that says, actually, this is ours. Like,
Mm.
democracy means power of us, right? Like, and if these tools and these processes are available to us, if we can figure out how to use them and demonstrate their power in such a way that elected representatives can step into them,
Mm.
not as a campaign against, nor as a kind of a way of influencing their decisions, but actually just transcending. There's a quote which the Taiwanese digital minister shared with me as one of her touchstones that I've, like, really become attached to. Buckminster Fuller, the mid-century American architect, he had this quote. He said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, create a new model that makes the existing obsolete."
Mm.
That, I think, that's I've been, like, meditating on that all over Christmas, right? And I think
Yeah.
this is some of where I land, is like, and then I bring into that, as I've been looking at the elections of last year in order to think about, like, what is this political moment this year. One of the ones I looked at was what happened in Poland, and this, I think, is the post you saw where I talked about using my voice. In Poland, they managed to actually dislodge a far right government that had already been installed and was entrenching its power, but not because of the political parties. Actually, this is a slight oversimplification, but not by much. It's, like, it wasn't the political parties that won. It was actually civil society organizations creating a different narrative. There was
Yeah.
this incredible piece of communication. Encourage people to look it up, post them the link, whatever. But where they sort of had the live recordings of the right wing politicians, the far right politicians, talking about the women in disparaging ways, talking about fossil fuel dependence, talking about and then these hordes of women from all over the country are depicted sort of putting a finger to their lips, and it
Mm.
looks like they're just saying shush, and then they rotate their hand and they're giving it the finger,
Brilliant.
and it's like it's we're not going to be silent anymore is the message.
Yeah.
And I think what that did in the spirit of this, like, we don't have to wait for this to be done for us. Poland is slightly different in that what they did in that election was they won in the sense of, they didn't win in the same sense as Ireland or Taiwan in kind of creating a different mode of government, not yet, but they did win the space to do that.
Mm.
And I think, like, in these elections, in this moment in time, what it looks like for 2024 to really become the year of the citizen, realistically, it's going to be a combination of defense and innovation, right? Like it, and but what's critical in those examples? So what happened as a result of that one creative execution was one of many, but the result was that youth turnout and turnout among women in Poland went through the roof.
Wow.
And that was the critical factor in beating the far right.
Yeah.
And what I think is exciting about that, when you bring it all together, when you put that together with the Irish example and with the Taiwanese example, you start to say, we don't need to wait for someone to do this for us. Like the nature of the citizen story, the nature of this idea of collective intelligence, of all of us are smarter than any of us, is that the power, the potential to demonstrate how this world might work lies with all of us.
Mm.
And the critical work is therefore of connection and imagination to build what that might be.
Thanks once again for being with us for another inspiring conversation on the Good Journeys pod. At Second Mountain, we firmly believe that resilience lies at the heart of all good journeys, and our friends over at Resilient Leaders Elements are deeply passionate about making world-class leadership development available to all. RLE now has an exciting opportunity for those who share the belief that anyone can be a resilient leader. This is open to anyone who'd value an opportunity to collaborate with like-minded professionals from around the world. Their global Resilient Leaders Elements accreditation programme gives you the chance to help others become more confident in who they are and what they do as a leader. The programme is facilitated by an experienced Resilient Leaders consultant who will guide you through the journey step by step. You'll then be welcomed into a worldwide network of like-minded resilient leadership specialists. So if you're passionate about developing resilient leadership in yourself and others, why not consider training to become a Resilient Leaders consultant? Visit resilientleaderselements.com now and find out more. So, taking that kind of power piece there, I mean, one thing I'm really interested in is, obviously the role of business to shape a better world and a more inclusive world. And, I know that, you've had an early relationship with B Corp. How vital would you say movements like B Corp are in terms of shaping that better world? And is it as simple as that?
I think I'm very proud that New Citizenship Project is a B Corp and was one of the founding members of B Lab UK when B corporations came to Britain. I'm not convinced that business is playing the role that it needs to play in this moment, and I see worrying signs of it, of the business community being a little bit kind of stuck in the consumer story, frankly. Mm-hmm. Like I see too many businesses, even good businesses, seeing their role as being we'll fix it for you. They're sort of the kind of that and staying in that kind of hero complex space. So you
buy this product and we will save the world. It's essentially the Band-Aid formula 40 years on, isn't it?
Exactly that. Much more succinctly put than me, Ben.
Thank you.
And I guess I think one of the things I did in my book in writing about citizen business was making the argument that actually these sorts of purposeful businesses, it's not enough to be purposeful for people. You've got to be purposeful with people, because the critical thing in this moment in time is the development of agency and connection, not just the delivery of smaller carbon footprints.
Yeah.
And therefore, and really, where I see the role of business going in this year of all years is I think business is going to have to engage and understand its role in relation to democracy as well. Like this stuff is in danger.
Yeah.
And the operating environment for these businesses is going to come under threat.
Yeah.
And so, in all honesty, my focus. You can tell my focus this year is shifting very much more to the political. I think, but I would love to see businesses see themselves as as participants and stakeholders in that. The one of the clearest expressions of consumer logic in our history is Milton Friedman's expression, the social responsibility of businesses to maximize its profits, right? Like that is individual self-interest will add up to collective interest. That's what he was saying. And any business that cowers behind that logic this year is essentially abandoning humanity and undermining its own operating environment. Like, I think it's going to get much more serious.
A big year.
I think so, man. Like, I'm not, and it's interesting. Like, this is really the first conversation where I've tried to explore some of this, and I don't feel like I've kind of done it perfectly or as yet. So thank you for letting me kind of experiment a bit with you.
Yeah.
But I feel like I feel an energy in this because I think there's an authenticity to acknowledging where we are, that actually is very empowering. Like a part of the consumer story, a part of of shush little people just go shopping, is pretending that things will be all right no matter what we do, and they won't.
No.
Like, they just won't. No. And with agency, like, it's the Spider-Man thing, right? Like, with power comes responsibility. With it, like, in a democracy, which we still are, and many around the world still are, that means we have a responsibility. Like, and I think I see my role. I'm playing with using my voice in a way that is less about saying it can all be great, and more about saying it can all be great, but that's going to need us to step up.
Yeah. And I think what I'm really interested in following your journey, I'm so glad we kind of have this conversation now and have recorded this in January 2024, because we can follow this journey that you're on this year, Jon. I'd encourage everyone listening, watching today to follow Jon and the New Citizenship Project on socials and see how this evolves, because it sounds like you've got some big ideas that are germinating, especially, as you say, you can't remove yourself from the political bubble. And the COVID response showed that all too clearly, the wider implications. You have a voice, you have a powerful network, you're doing, very important, vital work with the New Citizenship Project. So it's now, where do you take that to the next level? I mean, to kind of wrap up here, what would be great is if you could kind of sum up a little bit, Jon, in terms of what that work is you're doing with the New Citizenship Project, and how anyone that this resonates with today can get involved with your mission and purpose.
So you can find us newcitizenship.org.uk, on socials. You can find me. I'm particularly active on LinkedIn if people are there. I think a lot of this work is going to take me a little bit out of NCP, and potentially into some more political space, and I don't quite know what that looks like yet. But if you want to stay close to what I'm up to, my website is jonalexander.net. I have a little mailing list on there. That is the people who will hear it first, and I would love your company on the journey.
Well, what I would say is, if this is the start of your run for office, then you've got my vote.
No, we're going to do it from outside, brother. That's the way of this.
I love it. Yes, that's how it should be done. So 2024, the year that the shift to citizenship will truly be felt, in your opinion.
Could be.
It's a start.
Depends what we do.
And where we go from here. What are a couple of I always like to kind of leave with a couple of takeaways, for anyone that's been inspired by this conversation today. We are talking about big things here that challenge the very fibre of, how we've been raised and the society that we live in today. Any kind of immediate actions that someone could take away today, just to start to move themselves to be a little bit less consumer and a bit more citizen focused?
I think, like I say, that find the others. Like, choose a domain and find the others. Like, where do you care about? What do you want to be part of? What matters to you? and how can you find the others for whom that matters as well? I would like, and the first actor of joining in, like finding the meetings, finding the groups, finding the conversations, know fundamentally that this work what this time demands of us is not being individuals anymore. Like finding the things of which we are members and participants, and that's where it starts. That's where it starts.
Find your tribe.
Exactly that.
Yeah. Well, look, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the media. We're still in the middle of a cost of living crisis. They're not exactly good times, but I'm coming away from today with, much more optimism for a world that could be. And, I'm excited to, be joined by people like you. I mean, this is what this show is all about. This show is all about bringing together people who are inspired to do things differently, who have learned things from the journey and the path they've been on before, and, to build our own little community and tribe here. And that's what I love doing. And I'm very grateful for your time today, Jon.
Happy to be here, my friend. Onward.
Thank you very much. Well, look, onward. Yeah, onward. Exactly. Look, thank you to everyone that's joined today. As I said at the start, subscribe, follow, share. Sharing is the most important thing you can do with this podcast. If you've enjoyed this today, please pass it on to anyone you think Jon's words might resonate with. As I dish out some thanks, thank you to Jeff Easton from Tall Oak Productions, who always brings these conversations to life. This show relies on you guys to really deliver that impact. So, do share this around, and most importantly, check out Jon's excellent book. So that's it for another episode. I've been Ben Veal. My very special guest has been Jon Alexander. This has been Good Journeys for Second Mountain. So until next time, let's keep climbing together, and I'll see you all again soon. Onwards.